Welcome to Fueling Your Legacy, hosted by Samuel Knickerbocker. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a new, stronger foundation essential in creating your legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. Welcome to Fuel Your Legacy. This week, we are going to be talking a little bit about trauma and the different traumas that happen in our lives and how we can actually adjust, maneuver, and overcome the trauma that does happen in our lives. Everybody has it. Sometimes it's a big one-off traumatic event, and sometimes it comes over time. So stay tuned for that. This is something that's very important to talk about. At the end of this week, we were going to have, on the 11th, we were going to do our Next Generation Wealth and Legacy Workshop, but it's been changed to the 18th. So next weekend, so you have an extra week to get registered. Lucky you, there was just a lot of people who wanted to be there, but the 11th had a lot of conflicts for a lot of people. So out of love and respect for them, we decided to move it to the 18th. So for all of those of you who have been kind of holding off because you had conflicts, hopefully the 18th is going to be a little bit better. It's not going to be Mother's Day weekend anymore. There's a lot of benefits to moving it there. We didn't realize when we said it, but we, just like we hope other people are, we're coachable and we're willing to change when necessary. So the 18th is going to be the day for the Next Generation Wealth and Legacy Workshop there in Sandy, Utah. If you'd like tickets, please take a screenshot of this, post it on social media, and type FYL Sam in the comments, and then tag myself in it, and we will I'll reach out to you and make sure you get tickets to that. And then the first person who does it is actually going to win 2 free tickets to the event. So if you're the first person to screenshot this and post it on social media, then you're actually going to get 2 free tickets for you and either a trusted friend or a spouse or somebody like that, whatever works for you. But again, just super excited. You can go, if you want to just go directly into getting registered, you can go to my webpage, which is samknickerbocker.com, and through that webpage, go to the speaking page, and then there's 2 speaking events that are going to be happening. There's Level Up Mastermind, and then there is the Next Generation Wealth and Legacy Workshop. I'm just super excited for it, and I'm excited. I can't express it enough. Got a chance to speak this last weekend on some of the things that I'm going to be talking about there, and it's just always exciting. I love speaking. It is definitely where I enjoy most of my time, which is why I do a podcast, and I hope that you enjoy this podcast as much as I do. But let's hop into the trauma aspect of things. So with trauma, there's 2 forms of trauma that we're going to talk about. And this week, we're going to be talking about trauma today, introducing it. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing The Tao of Pooh. It's a book. If you haven't read it, it's a pretty short read. I think it was like 3.5 hours. Really fantastic, simple idea of how Taoism actually works and what are the benefits to adopting some of those beliefs into your life and some of those habits. And then on Friday, we're going to be hearing from a great friend of mine, and his name is Joe Dennis. He's a trauma therapist, and his story is incredible. The reason he went into trauma therapy and how he got there is just a story in and of itself. I'm super excited to bring him to you guys so you can really learn how can I manage some of my trauma or my stress a little bit better. So with that being said, let's dive into the 2 forms of trauma that I want to focus on. So there's like an immediate PTSD type situation. Actually, when I studied, man, my mind just went blank. Neuropsychology, I actually did a whole presentation on post-traumatic stress disorder, and I also, in conjunction with PTSD, I did a few things on different types of service animals that were going to be best. My one of the things I really wanted to know is, why do we choose dogs for service animals most often? Like, what is so special about a dog that they are the primary service animal? And actually, it came down to not that they're the most effective, but that they're the easiest to work with from a cleanliness standpoint, from a transportation standpoint. That's why we use dogs for the most part. They are incredibly intuitive, but they're not actually the best animal to be used for PTSD or reactive attachment disorders, mental disorders like that. Horses are actually the best animals to be using for that. From a scientific perspective, but they're just not as easily taken care of. They're a lot more expensive, things like that. That's a little bit off topic, but it's so important, because what today is about is how do we manage our PTSD. And how do we gain PTSD, right? So one way that people will get into PTSD is they'll have a significant emotional event, and that can be anything. It doesn't have to be like, oftentimes PTSD is kind of cornered into a veteran's problem, right? But it could be a divorce, it could be an accident, it could be feeling like you were abandoned as a child, left at the grocery store. It could be anything like that. And this PTSD can cause lots and lots of anxiety as things start to build, or when you find yourself in a similar situation, you could find yourself starting to hyperventilate. And because of these situations of where we can experience this PTSD, sometimes it's a significant event, and we can go back and we can deal with that event and move past it. There's other times where it happens over time. And the slow and gradual PTSD, it's a lot harder to identify this. I was speaking with my wife over the weekend, and it was really fascinating because we were talking about how can we overcome some of these situations. And so we brought her back to one situation specifically that happened to her in her early 20s. And I said, okay, well, that happened. Well, because I have talked to my wife a lot and I know a lot of the stories in her life, I was like, well, how do you think that this previous event affected how you acted in that situation? And she's like, oh, yeah, I can definitely see that connection now. She didn't before. And I said, okay, well, how about this experience when you were a child? How did this childhood experience affect that middle experience, which then affected your final experience, which now affects how you treat our kids, right? So PTSD, it goes all the way down, right? End result is my wife does not like being in situations where she's not in control. Anytime she feels like she's out of control, she kind of reacts abruptly and says, no, I need control of my situation. And that's, again, it's not a bad thing. It just is what it is. And we have to recognize it. It's okay to recognize it is what it is. And then once we recognize that, we actually can deal with the trauma. But until we recognize that it is what it is and we're okay with it being what it is, then dealing with the trauma is a little bit more difficult. And so that's the message of this week, is how do we structure our brain? How do we create our thought processes? How do we manage all of these things in our lives and make sure that every time something's happening, how do we reprogram every time something's happening that is happening for us, that we're learning from it, and that we're not letting it take control of our life and put us into a perpetual reactionary state, but rather identify what was good about that experience, that post-traumatic stress disorder, the PTSD, what happened there that was beneficial to you, taking those benefits and magnifying those so that instead of putting you constantly in a reactionary state, it's putting you in a perpetual actionary state where you actually are getting to choose every time you go through a similar situation. To do that, we have to deal with what it is. Now, again, this goes into, my wife may or may not love that I'm talking about this, but I think that's such a good example. I went through it as well, but I think right now that she's going through it, it's a very pertinent example, okay? She's having stories and experiences come up from her past that she has forgotten about, that she's locked away for a long time. And initially, she's thinking, well, man, this is painful. I wish I could forget these again. But the funny thing about the human brain is, from a animalistic perspective, right? Evolutionary says, if we're in danger, we're running from it. If we feel safe, then we can actually deal with something. We can process the information. Well, when these PTSD situations happen in our lives, we actually, our brain will eliminate access to that situation, and we'll be in a croc situation or a crocodile brain. And basically, anytime our brain starts to go there, it will start detecting, oh, that's a painful experience, and it will create a natural aversion to dealing with that experience. Now, the problem with that is we don't actually know why we're reacting the way we're reacting. We don't actually know why we're perpetually in a reactionary state, because we don't even remember. Our brain won't even let us get close to the actual event that caused us to spin into that. Now, my wife, over the last few months, has been getting closer to a point where she's actually, these memories are coming back up, which means, see, for me, it's a super positive thing. And she's like wallowing, like, this sucks. I hate the pain. For me, I'm sitting there thinking, man, I love what's happening, because what's happening is her brain, her crocodile brain is saying, you are safe. You're safe now. You're protected. You can deal with this experience finally. So the fact that you're having these harrowing, painful experiences coming back to mind is actually a huge sign of progression, because your brain is now allowing yourself to access that information from a perspective of you're safe enough to handle it. And you're progressed enough, you've understood enough of these layers that you can now actually deal with that experience. If you couldn't deal with it, your brain literally doesn't let you remember it. And just the very reminding you of it or getting close to that experience, putting yourself in a similar situation, you'll break down, you'll have huge anxiety attacks, you'll be it's just a terrible situation. And so the fact that she is in a position where now she's able to remember these things in vivid detail, that she's able to actually process this information, that is a huge sign of mental, emotional, spiritual growth in her life. And for you, if you're starting to feel that in your own life, that you've been listening to this podcast regularly for a few months now, and now you're starting to see, okay, I'm breaking some of my limiting beliefs down, and I'm getting to a place where I actually can deal with something. Well, in that situation, that's a huge sign of progress. And I think you need to give yourself a pat on the back. I think you need to go celebrate that you are progressing, right? Yes, it's painful. It's going to be painful to deal with that experience. It's going to be more painful to ignore that experience. But it's going to be painful to deal with that experience, and that's okay. It's actually a sign of progression and yeah, just healing. I mean, it's just awesome. Another example here that's kind of random, but when you start going to the gym, and this happens often with a lot of people, especially people who are heavier set, right? They start going to the gym, they actually start gaining weight first. And the person who doesn't understand the body, they're going to start gaining weight, and they're like, this stuff doesn't work. I started going to the gym and I started gaining weight, and then they'll quit because what's happening is their body is gaining muscle mass. Muscle mass weighs more than fat does. And so as their body starts to gain muscle mass, their body hasn't really clicked the switch and said, okay, we need to start burning fat yet. And so then they're actually gaining weight for the first week, sometimes even a month, they're going to be gaining weight. And then if they continue to work out, if they keep seeing gains, then that fat goes into fat burning. All that muscle starts burning that fat, and then they start dropping weight at a ridiculous speed. But that's why workout plans are for 60 to 90 days, maybe 12 weeks, somewhere around there, because of that cycle. Okay. But if you're not aware of that cycle, then you might quit as soon as it starts getting painful. As soon as you start gaining weight, as soon as you start whatever, you're going to quit rather than really realizing the compound efforts of that gain. So that's in a physical health situation and a mental health situation. Today, when we're talking about trauma, whether it's a chain of traumatic events, and no one event was really, really that traumatic, but it was a chain of traumatic events, or if it's one significant traumatic event that just set you off on a downward spiral, either one, it's just important to recognize the way to deal with it is to confront your past, but do it in a safe situation. The nice thing is your brain really doesn't allow you to even see the thing that needs to be addressed until you're in a safe enough place to address it. And that, I think, is one of the most uplifting, positive, loving things that God has done for us, is to make sure that we can only have to deal with what we can deal with at that time. So stay tuned for Wednesday. We're going to be talking about the Tao of Pooh. And if you haven't read it, again, I strongly, highly recommend you go pick up the book. If you don't want to pick it up, go onto YouTube. It's like 3 or 4 hours long. Again, it's super, super short, and just a really good representation of how to actually start altering your mindset to deal with things. And so I'm going to share that with you guys here on Wednesday. And then on Friday, again, we're going to have Joe Dennis, who is just phenomenal at what he does. Just a pure wizard when it comes to trauma therapy. He really understands people, partially because he's been there himself, and he's now coaching people through the same trauma or the same thought processes of how he was able to get out completely, not just like get out of PTSD, but completely remove PTSD from his existence, which is phenomenal for as bad as it was for him. So stay tuned for that, and we will catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy. Thanks for joining us today. If what you heard resonated with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me so I can give you a shout out on the next episode. And thanks to all those who have left a review. It helps spread the message of what it really takes to build a legacy that lasts. Catch you next time on Fueling Your Legacy.